And what is up? Welcome in. Wes Mitchell here. Chris Clark, GC Live, Monday episode of the show. As always, brought to you by our buddy Clint Hammond of the Mortgage Network, 803-771-6933, ClintHammond.com, where you can find Clint. Hope everybody's doing well, having a great Monday. Hope everybody stayed safe over the weekend. And Chris, a little bit of a different kind of approach to the show today. We've already given our thoughts on the SC State game. If you missed that, go check that out. Friday episode of GC Live. We're going to go ahead and turn our attention to Kentucky a little bit. We'll try not to necessarily get completely into the weeds of the matchup itself in South Carolina versus Kentucky, but I'm going to go ahead and give some thoughts on the Wildcats and what to expect from them on this Saturday. Chris, I know we talked about it a little bit on the 107.5 show already, but I know you got a chance to take in that Kentucky Ole Miss game on Saturday, and always good to be able to watch South Carolina's upcoming opponent. Against a solid opponent, it's a little bit easier to tell what's going on, against a pretty good team in Ole Miss.
Yeah, and that was a great game. It started the day off right with that game at Ole Miss. Back and forth, some big plays by both teams. Kentucky had a chance there, Wes, at the end to win it. A couple fumbles back to back. And I think that was the difference in the game. The two teams were really closely matched, I thought. 19-22 was the margin. Kentucky made a few more mistakes, right? They had a big special teams play with Barry and Brown, the wide receiver, who's also excellent on special teams, but they had some problems in the kicking game. And then, of course, the turnovers there, especially at the end of the game, ended up being their undoing. And Ole Miss, it's not like they lit it up offensively, Wes, with just 22 points, but they were able to hit some chunk plays, especially there in the running game, that ended up getting them the win. Got off to a little bit of a faster start, too, against Kentucky, which I'm sure, actually, Michael Lynn, that was his first comment today in the chat line, getting off to a faster start against Kentucky. I'm sure that's something we'll be diving into throughout the week as we start to preview this game.
Yeah, man. So I think, first of all, Ole Miss built a little bit differently, at least so far this year, than what we're used to seeing. I think their defense appears to be improved. I think their offense hasn't quite gotten in a groove, certainly not into the groove to the level that they have been the last few years. And obviously they've lost quite a bit on offense as far as Ole Miss goes. So I kind of went into this game maybe with a little different feel for Ole Miss than what I think they actually ended up being. And I'm trying to take that into consideration when we consider what Kentucky is as well. I kind of always go into Kentucky under Stoops and think, they're going to run the football. They're going to play great defense. Will Levis has kind of changed the calculus a little bit in terms of what you have to do to stop them offensively with your defense. I think for the longest time, it was kind of their run first, run second, run third team. And their quarterbacks at times have struggled to throw the football. You add Levis into the mix last year, a little bit different situation there. To me, yeah, he's like the leader of their offense. He's their guy. I don't know if he has quite played to his potential yet this season. Ole Miss, I felt like, and again, I'm trying to get it out of my head how bad Ole Miss has sort of been on defense the last couple of years. They do appear to be improved on defense. So at the same time, I feel, and I don't know what the credit is more the credit on Ole Miss's side. Is it more on the side of Kentucky having some struggles? But it felt like, as Aaron weighs in on Facebook, says Kentucky's offensive line struggled. Levis is holding on to the ball too long. And I don't know, maybe there's some analytics out there that can kind of find that divide between, is it the quarterback holding the ball too long? Is it the offensive line not giving him enough time? Where's the disconnect? But it seemed like things were just a little bit off for him. Like the timing was off. There were plays that were there where, even when he went to the correct receiver, there's a deep ball that's just barely out of the receiver's hands. Not just the fumbles. You look late in the game, man, they scored what appeared to be the game-winning touchdown. And the only thing you can say is they snapped the ball too quickly. Like the receiver gets called for not being set. But in my opinion, that play is on the quarterback because I know you're trying to hurry up. I know you're trying to snap the ball quickly, but you don't wait that split second to let everybody get lined up. So I don't know, man. Like I go into this game and I said we weren't getting into the matchup part. Maybe we will a little bit here. I go into this game. I'm not completely sold on this Kentucky team. I'm really, really not. At the same time, we haven't seen enough the last year and a half from South Carolina on the road against SEC opponents to know if they're going to be good enough to make a difference. But I mean, what is your thought? What is your thought on Kentucky so far, man? Like I can't put my finger on it. I think they're a solid team.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're quite like they're not a top 10 team in my opinion, or what I traditionally look at as a top 10 team.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was alluding to last week when look, they should be favored over South Carolina. Like I'm totally fine with that. I have no doubts. Even the line, which I think has moved a little bit, right, Wes, what is it, 10, 11, whatever it may be. About 10 points right now. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm going to see what it's at right now.
I know it opened at 11 and a half. I think that's fair. I mean, again, South Carolina, I don't know how much they bake in last season, but certainly road game they had this season at Arkansas, they did not perform well. And that was a trend that even dated back to last season as well. So that's something they've got to correct. But I didn't feel like I recognize, and you can say a team is a good team and is favored to win over another team without putting them in the top 10, right? You can say Will Levis is a good quarterback without having him be the number one pick or the best quarterback in the country, without kind of force feeding that. It can be all those things. The past couple weeks, Kentucky's had some struggles. You look at their game against Northern Illinois, who's won one game this season. I think they're 1-3. They won that game by 8. I think NIU had a later score to kind of pull within 8, but still, they didn't dominate that football game. I think Kentucky had one turnover to NIU's none in that game. You look at this game against Ole Miss. That was a game. I know I heard Lane Kiffin and Mark Stoops, I think both said some version of this after the game Saturday. It's an evenly matched game going in, which was part of why it was so appealing to everybody. Close in rankings. The thought was close in talent, two opposite styles meeting. There are a lot of interesting storylines. And indeed, it played out close, but the team that made more mistakes lost. Last year, South Carolina forced more Kentucky mistakes. Kentucky put the ball on the ground. What was it? They had the ball 3 times in Kentucky territory, but they just couldn't come away with points. They just were simply not good enough on offense to capitalize at all. This year's team may, at South Carolina, have more opportunity to do that, Wes, and I'm starting to dive into the game more than I should, but I think this Kentucky team has some vulnerabilities. They're banged up after the Ole Miss game. How much, we'll see. I'm sure we'll find out throughout the week. They do have capability in the passing game with Dane Key, Barry and Brown, with Levis, who can make the throws, etc. They certainly have. They got Chris Rodriguez back. He's a yards after contact guy, which South Carolina struggled with at times this year, especially against Arkansas. Still a very solid team, right? But there's not a huge gap, I don't think, between these teams. So South Carolina goes on the road, plays well. I think this could be a very, very competitive game down to the end.
Yeah, and I, Chris, think looking at the stats, I mean, I almost like I just triple checked this because I almost didn't believe it. Kentucky has struggled to run the football this year, and I kind of had put that in my brain as like they've probably struggled compared to what we normally expect from them. Like they normally run the football very well. Struggle to run the ball for them is kind of what I expected. Again, Rodriguez is back. He was back this past week. Obviously, will be there against South Carolina. He is a difference maker. And I think let's see, we got people making a lot of good points before I can even say them. Aaron on Facebook said he was having to break a lot of tackles to get to 72 yards, and that was something going in where they. I look at the running game a lot of times, Chris. It's all right. How many? I think they talked about this on that broadcast. I watched so many games on Saturday. Sometimes it runs together. I think this was the Kentucky broadcast. Don't quote me on it, but you look at running game as all right. How much was that play blocked for? And that's just like all right, the average running back, or let's just say you get tackled instantly. What was it blocked for? And then what does the running back do from there? And I think, for one, they've struggled in both sides of it. Maybe not having guys breaking tackles, but two, they have not blocked well enough to give the running backs room. Rodriguez, especially, and again, I'm going to get into the game too. I'm not planning to, but it just happens. Against South Carolina, him against their linebackers in the hole, who wins those battles? When does it become a 2-yard run, and when does he fall forward to make it, a 3, 4, 5, 6-yard run? Those things, those little game within the game things will probably be the difference in this contest, I think. But a lot of what they're having to do in the running game is going to be Rodriguez, unless they just really improve making things happen. Chris, they are literally last in the SEC in rushing, in traditional, like no analytics, no other BS, like straight up rushing game stats. Kentucky, y'all think South Carolina is struggling to run the ball? Kentucky is averaging 86.8 yards per game on the ground this year. And they are averaging this is insane to me. 2.52 yards per carry this season through 5 games. And before the super realistic / negative people say, well, South Carolina was struggling to run the football until they started playing Charlotte and SC State. This is not a Kentucky team that has played juggernauts every week by any means. So 2.52, to put this in perspective, Mississippi State averaged more rushing yards per game than Kentucky does, and Mississippi State runs the air raid. They run the ball 23 times per game. So, this is a South Carolina team that's averaging almost 2 yards per carry more on the ground than Kentucky. More like 1.7 or so, but still. That's crazy to me. Like South Carolina has to be good enough defensively to make it matter. Like, I'm not saying Kentucky isn't going to be able to run the ball against Carolina. They very well could. We know Carolina's struggled to stop the run. But, Chris, I'm looking at that and I'm trying to just remind myself, hey, not the same Kentucky team. This team is not built, at least so far, they're not built with the strengths we're used to them having.
And one, devil's advocate point to all this, which I totally agree with you on all this, and it's backed up by statistical evidence, right? This was Chris Rodriguez's first game back for Kentucky, and he is the yards after catch, yards after carry, yards after contact guy for Kentucky. We've seen that before. We've seen it against South Carolina. We've seen it against other teams. Looking at what he did, Wes, in game 1, it looks like he had 58. Is that right? 58 yards after contact. Yeah, that should be right. 58 yards after contact. So he's a guy that can get his yardage after contact And then you take it to the South Carolina side. I think we all still remember, and it'll take a long time for that memory to fade, if ever, 154 yards after contact surrendered to Arkansas with, Rocket Sanders and KJ Jefferson, 21 missed tackles. That's the type of thing that you can ill afford, right? So I anticipate, my guess would be that throughout the season, and probably starting in this game, Kentucky probably gets better in that department because Rodriguez is back. Mark Stoops mentioned after the game, Wes, that he could tell Rodriguez was a little bit, he didn't use this word, but he's a little gassed later in the game because he's still working himself back into, game shape, quote unquote. But they're still going to try to line up and run the football. And I don't blame them. That's kind of still, even with Levis and their receivers, that still needs to be a big part of what they do. And they'll see what South Carolina's put on tape this year. Frankly, too many missed tackles, too many runs that they've gotten gashed on. Even in the past couple of weeks, there's been a few of those. So I anticipate them still running the football, but you're right. It's not like they've torn it up in that department. I do think having Rodriguez out probably is a reason for that. It's a contributing factor. But they have had some struggles up front, and that's been an area where Kentucky, I think the last several years, they would perennially have like an undervalued O-line, like underrated O-line. And I don't really think they have that this year. They've been struggling in that department. And so that's certainly a storyline to watch too going forward.
Yeah, and I think Rodriguez, again, South Carolina's going to have to tackle well. Like that's, bottom line, period. But and he will help their line, but I'm just not willing to quite explain it away by just them missing him. I mean, Cavassier Smoke, pretty good back in his own right. I'm trying to look at what his numbers look like this year. And see, he is averaging 5.1 yards per carry this year, so it hasn't been completely devoid. Some of that, how many? I should have done this beforehand instead of doing it on the fly. How much of that, as much as they have struggled to protect the passer, has that been? Okay, yeah, they've allowed 19 sacks per game. So whenever, Chris, I see, this running back is averaging 5 yards a carry, but the team is not running the football, you get statistically skewed a bit because in college football, sacks is a rushing stat, which I've never thought has made any sense at all. But what you find out there is that Kentucky is last in the SEC in sacks allowed, allowing 3.80 sacks per game. And again, to give a little perspective, Kentucky has given up 19 sacks. South Carolina has given up 10 sacks this year. So I don't know, man. We'll see. It feels early on. Again, we're going to get into this as the week progresses. It feels low scoring potentially to me. Now, again, South Carolina's defense, the last season plus, has struggled on the road to stop teams. So what gives there? I don't know. We'll find out. But Kentucky going to try to keep things in front as always. They're going to play well up front as always. And interestingly enough, from what Shane Beamer said and what was said on the broadcast, these Kentucky linebackers are kind of really actually the strength of their defense, maybe in some ways the strength of their entire team.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, DeAndre Square has been there. I think Rich Brooks recruited him. He's been there forever, it seems like. He's a super senior. He's a 6-year guy, so he's been there forever. Jaquez Jones, who had a big play in that game, is a great player. There's a little bit of talk, Wes, out of Lexington, and we're not going to go deep on this. There's some injury talk kind of emanating from Lexington today on some guys that would be important. And I haven't seen as of this recording, this live show, haven't seen anything come out on that. But Jones is one of the players that's been thrown around like as a rumor mill type of thing. So we'll see. But those guys are really, really good. They have size up front. I mean, typical what we've seen from Kentucky the past few years. I think we'll have to check on the status of J.J. Weaver. It's another guy who's really good for them who plays on the defensive line. But they got a lot of athleticism and size up front that can – we saw it last season, really cause South Carolina problems. I don't think – who was the nose tackle, Wes, last year? You remember that guy?
Yeah, I remember him.
He is not, thankfully for South Carolina, on the roster anymore. But
what was that kid's name?
He
was a stud.
He caused some issues last season. But they still got plenty of guys. And you're right. I mean, totally concur with Beamer, who I'm sure has watched more Kentucky than I have and would know better. But those linebackers are really, really good. And so, you think about the intermediate and short passing game. You think about the run game, the stress that they can put on you, as an offense and as a play caller, it can become difficult.
Yeah, I think they have a freshman now that is about the same size as that kid. And he's going to be hard pressed to be as good as quickly as that guy was, but was just one of those, did his job perfectly. Like, he could have recorded no stats in that game, and he still would have done his job perfectly because he was just eating up the middle. South Carolina getting no movement with the inside zone up the middle last year, and certainly would be something to pay attention to this year. Even though he's gone, they're always pretty good up front, and they develop. Like, they've done a fantastic job. They get guys in their scheme. Play a little more zone than a lot of teams, it seems like, but they just eat you up front and then get you in third and long, and then they go after you. So you got to respect them. If you're a Carolina fan, you don't have to like them, but you do have to kind of respect what they have done, especially defensively under Mark Stoops. And let's see, Chris, speaking of injuries, South Carolina injury report yesterday from Shane Beamer, last night, teleconference. Sounds pretty positive. I actually had forgotten with the quick turnaround there. I'd forgotten Trey Jones got rolled up in the game Thursday. So Trey, one of the guys that's still a little bit banged up, questionable for the weekend. Dylan Wanham obviously still trying to get back to health, but it sounds like Darius Rush could be back. David Spalding could be back. Both those guys practice. Boogie Huntley easing back in, and obviously we've said this before. They're going to miss Mo Kaba and Jordan Strachan. I think this is a game, Chris, where they may miss Mo Kaba. I don't want to say the most, but they're certainly going to miss his size at linebacker in a game like this. Banging heads with Chris Rodriguez all game. But in terms of the other guys, it does seem like they accomplished what they needed to for these two out-of-conference games, and that was to get themselves back close to full strength.
Avoid major injuries, which they did for the most part, or they did avoid major injuries to starters and get healthier overall. And so we saw some of the guys like Rush that, got held out again. I would think, Wes, some guys that probably maybe could have gone if you want to push the envelope, but you don't. And this is the stretch where you really need your guys to be available. And so better news for the Gamecocks on that front. By the way, since I brought up Kentucky's injury situation and did not have a great update, a little bit more here. Nick Roush from Kentucky Sports Radio. A few relevant updates from Mark Stoops today. Will Levis, you guys probably saw his finger picture on his non-throwing hand. Doesn't need surgery on that. Jaquez Jones, the excellent linebacker that we mentioned earlier, is banged up. So Mark Stoops says we'll see. So I'm not as adept at Mark Stoops coach speak. We don't cover that program, so I don't have a good feel for what that means. But he's at least in question, I would suppose, Wes. And J.J. Weaver, the excellent defensive end that I mentioned earlier, who did not play against Ole Miss, he's getting better, and there's a chance that he will go this week. So it may not be 100%, but may play. So a few pretty relevant injury updates there on the Kentucky front.
Yeah, definitely, man. That'll be something to keep an eye on there. South Carolina-wise, seems like Darius Rush is back and at least practiced yesterday. And I think, Man, does it feel to you like they are sort of getting, like, it seems like DQ Smith may be the nickel moving forward. Like I don't know, like I could be misreading that, but I'm wondering if it's not going to be Rush and Cam outside and then DQ at nickel, because DQ has played, and I know guys have been out, but he has played every single meaningful snap at nickel the last 2 weeks. And I feel like if that wasn't the case, I think late in the game they would have still been mixing him in and getting him reps at safety, which that's where he started the year. He was a backup safety, essentially the fourth safety, among the two positions. Well, it's been all nickel, and that was originally because of need, because that was just what they were forced to do. But all these reps at nickel has my wheels turning and thinking that might be the direction this thing is headed.
I think he played the most defensive snaps on the team last game,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. And you're right, all nickel. So, I mean, putting those pieces together, Shane Beamer has been very irked by the amount of penalties that we've seen, being a little grabby. And going back and looking, because, Wes, I mean, obviously I was watching the game live on Thursday. Going back on the rewatch, I could tell you could see Beamer's frustration on the broadcast as well. And then he addressed it after the game on Thursday. He addressed it during his teleconference. Obviously Cam Smith's going to be on the field, right? Marcellus Dow, I think, will still be on the field, and you could even package it up, right? But if you have a guy that you feel good about at nickel in DQ, if Rush comes back, like you said, maybe that's your starting configuration. Maybe you can roll DQ off there every now and then, and you play a matchup with Cam against, a slot guy, and put Marcellus Dow back out there. He's played a lot of football. But as they look to get a little bit better there, as they continue to integrate DQ at that newer for him position, I could totally buy that and see that.
Yeah, and I think that it seems to me like at cornerback currently, after Rush and Cam and Marcellus, they're a question mark. So
Yep.
I think at the very least, if you're playing DQ at nickel and then Cam and Rush outside and then Marcellus mixing in as your depth guy, Marcellus could be your depth guy at every single spot almost. And you're kind of just basically playing those four, maybe some David Spalding mixed in at nickel, but you're kind of playing those four guys in those three spots and just rotating Marcellus in potentially as your backup. I don't know. We're speculating completely, but it just feels to me like they are getting DQ ready to be the nickel, as opposed to the guy filling in at nickel. Could be dead wrong. We'll see if it ends up playing out like that. And somebody asked, let's properly name them, Michael on YouTube, why not Eamon Worry at linebacker? I think for one, Michael, two needed at safety right now. Like you can't damage that position because it was already such a big need coming into the season. The other side is, I mean, Chris, I think ultimately Eamon Worry could end up at linebacker. That's always that's always been a possibility. That said, I've liked so much of what I've seen from him at safety. Unless he just blows up from a size standpoint the next couple of years, it's going to be hard to take him out of that safety spot.
It is. And the depth, we talked about the depth coming into the season, and that was before Nick Eamon and DQ Smith both came on. Of course, DQ started out the season at safety primarily before he's kind of shifted the focus to nickel. But they're still not in a good spot at safety. I mean, really, right there, it seems like they've got three guys that they seem to feel pretty good about. They could always move DQ back, but primarily it's been, Eamon Worry, it's been Devontae Reed, and then RJ Roderick has been out there as well. That's three guys for a couple spots, right? And you don't feel great. I mean, we saw in the Georgia game, Wes, Nick Eamon Worry had to leave that game for a little bit banged up. And Devontae Reed did too. So not a great situation from a depth standpoint. You don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. Like the linebacker spot is not totally shored up or solved, but you do at least have some answers and some options there. And quite frankly, I think a little bit more depth that you feel pretty decent about at linebackers. So you got to weigh all that. It's kind of a balancing act. And Eamon Warrior, I think, is probably right where he needs to be.
Yeah, especially for this year, man. I mean, such a big part of this defense, and had a couple of busts in coverage throughout the season so far, but for the most part, has just been fantastic for them. And I think has clearly took a position that I think, were rightfully so, kind of concerned about coming into the year, and helped solidify it. And at least right now with three guys playing two spots, it's not a situation where you're just having to play two guys the entire game, which we have seen over the last few years. There have been times when that has 100% been the case. Trying to think if there's anything else newsy we need to get to. Over the weekend, Mazio Bennett setting his announcement October 16th. That's right around the corner. Chris, this is one, if you'd have told me 2 months ago, hey, he's going to announce in a couple months, I would have said South Carolina all the way. Right now, when he released his top 8, I think the two to keep an eye on are Tennessee and South Carolina. Quite a bit of Tennessee buzz right now, and that is a scary thought for South Carolina.
Well, and I wrote about this a little bit in the Insider Report this morning on GamecockCentral.com. 2023 class in-state West, Gamecocks have done a nice job. You look at, I think On3 Consensus actually has the offensive lineman Jordan Knox from Northwestern High in Rock Hill as the 5th best prospect in the state. South Carolina did not offer him. So if you take the top 4 that they did offer, they're in position to get 3 of them. Monroe Freeling from Oceanside is going to Georgia. Other than that, they've got the rest of the top 3 committed in Montague Rames, Markey Anderson. They've got those guys committed. And then obviously Xavier McLeod out of Camden. That's a good start. And this was, they kind of had this long runway. They've been recruiting all those guys from a long time. Well, they look to be in good shape to follow that up in 2024. You think about Josiah Thompson from Dillon. You think about Cam Pringle from Woodland and Mazio Bennett from Greenville. Those were kind of the 3 in-state guys. Am I missing one, Wes? I think that's it. That's kind of your core 3 from in-state in that 24 class that, you've seen Dante Reno on social media talking about those guys a lot. This would throw a wrench in that, right? Mazio Bennett, a guy you've had on campus a ton. Obviously, there's some allure right now to Tennessee, probably especially for a wideout, right? You look at their offense, what their offense is doing. You look at how active and resourceful and effective Tennessee has been on the NIL front, which, like it or not, is a giant part of the recruiting process now for a lot of guys. This makes some sense, but it would definitely be a tough blow for South Carolina, who's invested a lot of time into this recruitment.
Yeah, did you say Blake Franks too? That'd probably be the next guy.
That would be another guy. Yep.
In state, also at Greenville High, and yeah, man, I think it's one of those things. Craig saying he's going to Tennessee. I think this is one of those things right now. I mean, Tennessee has the momentum. That tends to be pretty clear. He's fresh off of a visit there. He was there for Tennessee-Florida game, and their offense has been, very impressive for wide receivers. I think the thing to watch here, man, will be, does it possibly reverse course in the next week or so leading up to the announcement? Because, y'all will remember the Markey Anderson, North Carolina smoke leading up to his announcement, a week or so before, was not made up. Like, that was very real. And, so I think if you're South Carolina, you can't give up at this point, because this is someone, as you said, they've invested a lot of energy into him. He's invested a lot of energy into South Carolina. He's visited Carolina many times. He has a sister at South Carolina. He has basically visited South Carolina more than anywhere else. And I think the best relationships are probably at South Carolina. But right now, just has, I would say, probably don't want to speak for him, but the job they've done on offense at Tennessee and the output for their wide receivers. And, you've got a kid from the state of South Carolina playing very, very well for them at wide receiver. That stuff matters as well. So we'll certainly be tracking that one moving forward. But tons of Tennessee buzz around Bennett at this point as we do our podcast on Monday, October 3rd. Chris, you got anything else for this one, man? I know we wanted to kind of do just a little quick look at Kentucky. We've gotten a little bit all over the place, but still relevant, I think. And we'll obviously have all week long to kind of dive into it. What else did you notice? I'll tell you what, man, before we get off here, Barry and Brown, what did you think of him, dude? Their wide receiver / kickoff returner.
I think that's a very worrisome player for South Carolina when you look. Dane Key, who we're familiar with through the recruiting process, has been really good this year. Barry and Brown, another really good recruiting job by Kentucky, and very fast player. Hurt you at receiver, can obviously hurt you in the return game. So yeah, he definitely he stood out, and that's the guy that South Carolina's coaching staff, defense and special teams, they are going to be pointing him out, making sure that everybody knows where he's at on the field and what he can do, because he can move.
Well, man, watching him, he's one of those guys that almost like breaks the defense. And what I mean by that is you can just watch, especially on special teams. It looks like the guys are taking proper angles and they're like going at him at the angle that they're supposed to. And he just breaks the angle. Like he is that fast. Did you pay attention to him during the recruiting process? I know he's incredibly highly recruited out of Tennessee, right?
Yeah. Mildly paid attention to him. I believe South Carolina was one of the schools that had offered him, like a bunch of others. Pretty highly recruited, like you said, highly ranked kid. Paid attention to him a little bit, but I was not super, involved in terms of talking to him a lot and things like that, because I don't think South Carolina was really much in that one. But definitely an impressive prospect, and that's shown early at Kentucky too.
Yeah, true freshman. I think when I was reading, man, he was the 100 and 200 meter dash champion in Tennessee at some point, and just is a dude, man. So a guy to keep an eye on. By the way, somebody else to keep an eye on is our friends at Liberty Tax and the tax team right here in the Columbia area. Y'all give me a second. Let me find my graphic. We got too many graphics on here now. Got to sort through them. 803-462-5576. Again, the tax team at Liberty Tax is there for you year round. If you filed an extension this year, the deadline for that is coming up soon. If you've got some back taxes to return that you haven't filed, if you owe a debt to the IRS, go to the folks right here in Columbia. They will locally help you get things straightened out. Convenient locations with a friendly staff. The tax team at Liberty Tax is located in Irmo, Columbia, and Lexington. That's 1123 South Lake Drive, 7467 St. Andrews Road, and 551 St. Andrews Road. Again, 803-462-5576. Shout out to Larry, and I appreciate Liberty Tax supporting us here on GC Live. That is the wrong banner. There we go. Chris, we'll have the night show on Tuesday, which will be with Mike Uva. Chris and I will be back Wednesday or Thursday. We got to work on a Kentucky guest. I'm sure we can make that happen. And then our final thoughts on Friday. Going to be an interesting week. It feels like the hatred for Kentucky has reached rivalry level on the South Carolina fan base side.
It has. And the comments from Mark Stoops earlier this year, Shane Beamer's response, adds another layer to it. I don't think there's bad blood between those guys at all, but certainly did not. It fanned the flames, I think, on both sides with South Carolina and for Kentucky. And, of course, Gamecock fans are hungry for a win over the Wildcats on the road as well. So many storylines, Wes. So there's a lot to dive into this week. I know we said we weren't going to dive deep in today. We did a little bit, but plenty more to talk about the remainder of the week.
Definitely appreciate y'all joining us. As always, he is Chris. I am Wes. We'll see you later this week.